You've probably seen this symbol, the yin and yang. Lao Tzu, the semi-mythical founder of Taoism, once wrote, "Everything is embedded in yin and embraces yang." Lao Tzu, or Old Master, was probably the most classical liberal. Can you imagine a China with its natural resources and ancient wisdom that is a beacon for liberty and prosperity? It's a China where Taoism and China's other long-standing philosophical tradition, Confucianism, are like yin and yang.
You need these two components, you see, and they play against each other beautifully in Chinese society. The idea of the Tao is the ruler who abdicates and lets all the people, trusts all the people to conduct their own affairs. It means that the more you allow things in yourself and in your surroundings to take place, the more order you will have.
So Lao Tzu advises governing as one would cook a small fish in a pan. Don't turn it so often that it falls apart. And he imagines the ideal state as no bigger than a village. There's just one problem. Mao and the communists seized and twisted the wisdom of the other component, Confucianism, to suit their political agenda. But why was Confucianism susceptible to that seizure? Why Confucianism instead of Taoism? We spoke to two Chinese women who had starkly different upbringings, but who arrived at similar conclusions about Confucianism.
I'm going to argue Confucianism has in fact laid the intellectual and the psychological foundation of the Chinese totalitarianism. Why it's a success in China is because it taps into some predisposition of Chinese people, and that is related to Confucianism.
Leaders love Confucius' idea of organizing the society into a hierarchy structure. Everybody have to behave accordingly.
So who was Confucius exactly? Well, you probably know that he was a Chinese philosopher and teacher. He lived about 72 years, from 551 BC to 479, and he was full of wisdom we still incorporate today.
Confucius' teaching is part of everybody's daily life. For example, we say if three people walking together, there must be one is my teacher. And so we always can learn something from somebody, and it's not just from school.
He's also purported to have said, "Do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire," and "an oppressive government is more to be feared than a tiger." Sure, sounds like a friend of liberty and of humanity in general, but it might not be so simple.
His thesis is that in ideal society is peace and harmony, and so by harmony means that everybody they belong to different hierarchical class or status, and so they are required by their status or by their class to perform their duties.
Confucius's conception of superiority, hierarchy, and obligation stemmed from what he believed to be the ideal family structure, with a patriarch at the top and where everyone else just kind of falls in line.
It says a person's body from the hair to the toe, they belong to your parents because you are created by your parents. So basically, the message is that you are a property of your parents.
You can see why all the rulers of the country love that, and they want people to know their position, their in the society, in the family, and behave accordingly.
They say the greatest trick the devil ever pulled is convincing the world he didn't exist, while the greatest trick the Chinese Communist Party ever pulled was conflating country with family, because nowadays the linguistic flexibility to separate family from state no longer exists. Ready for your introduction to Mandarin? Here's the character for state, and here's the character for family. The word country is a simple combination of those two characters, and traditionally you could put them in any order.
Then after the Communist Party took over China, and so the official term is just state family. And so their propaganda is based on the sequence of the world. You can see how the state should be priority prior to the family. And also their propaganda is without state, there wouldn't be family.
It started with the Great Leap Forward, Mao's period from 1958 to 1962 of rapid and murderous development that sought to modernize and industrialize the Chinese economy. It led to the deadliest famine in history. Between 15 and 55 million people died.
Then 1966, Mao started the Cultural Revolution. It's another act of try to make the entire country think in only one thought.
In some ways, Mao sought to emulate legalism from the Qin dynasty, and Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, who burned Confucius's books and buried Confucius scholars alive. It's no wonder Mao was so fond of the legalists. They believed the state should be used to create wealth and power. Meanwhile, some scholars assert in Confucianism, social life and government should aim at creating good ethics and self-development. And of course, under Mao, Confucius's quote about how an oppressive government is more to be feared than a tiger was all but eliminated from the record books, leaving just his conceptions of hierarchy and obedience. In many ways, these are the roots of the modern Chinese state, from the hostility toward Hong Kong, to the draconian COVID lockdowns, to the banning of Bitcoin mining, the one-child policy, and of course the slave labor and genocide, the, in a word, totalitarianism.
One defining feature of totalitarianism is that the adherents, is that right pronunciation? They all believe in a truth, and they all believe there is a final human utopia. And so their mission is really to do whatever to lead the human species towards that final human utopia.
So here's the question we pose to you. Is Confucianism a noble philosophy that was simply hijacked by power-hungry politicians? Or was Confucius, as Murray Rothbard wrote, just an apologist for the rule of philosopher bureaucrats? Do your research and let us know in the comments. In our view, if there's hope for China, it rests in the restoration of balance between Confucianism and Taoism, with Lao Tzu's teachings as a guide. Some legends, by the way, have Lao Tzu as a bureaucrat, a record keeper who got so fed up with corruption in the Zhao dynasty that he said, "Screw this, I'm out of here."
His philosophy can be summarized as non-doing. So just doing nothing, sit there and do nothing, just simulate yourself into nature.
This philosophy of non-doing, Wu-Wei in Chinese, can be summarized by one of Lao Tzu's famous sayings. "Those who would take over the world and manage it, I see that they cannot grasp it. For the world is a spiritual vessel and cannot be forced. Whoever forces it, spoils it." Pretty classical liberal, if you ask us. And interestingly, the phrase Wu-Wei was used once and only once by Confucius, who wrote, "Was it not the Emperor Shun who did nothing, Wu-Wei, and yet ruled well?" But how could a philosophy of non-doing dig China out of its totalitarian reality? Well, it's happened before, in a way. Because even though non-doing is the closest English translation, that doesn't quite summarize it. It's more like moving as water moves in a river, without ulterior motives, doing things for their own sake and being in the moment while doing them. That's pretty much how a free society works, but it's the total opposite of how a totalitarian government acts, forcing people to do things with that ever-present ulterior motive of furthering its own power. And we're even seeing the beginnings of a Wu-Wei social uprising.
Suddenly, somebody came up with a term of laying flat, rest, and overnight became the most popular term. That's came from Taoism, but Chinese government hate it because it's a grassroots movement.
You might not have realized that of the world's oldest known civilizations, Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, ancient India, Only one still exists today in a recognizable form. China has survived in large part thanks to its ancient, deep philosophical tradition. But Mao and the communist revolutions of the 20th century have all but eliminated one aspect of that tradition while bastardizing the other.
The government's number one agenda is to preserve Chinese Communist Party and the leadership. And to Xi Jinping, he doesn't only want to preserve his power and his communist ideology in China, he wants to expand it to the rest of the world.
The core of Chinese political culture is harmony, is stability. That's the guiding principle, not freedom, not personhood, not human dignity, not human rights.
China's future depends on rediscovering its pro-liberty past. Any stability, let alone prosperity, to be found will rely on rediscovering that, as a Taoist philosopher once wrote, good order results spontaneously when things are let alone. There has never been such a thing as governing mankind with success.